Hello, this is Courtney with C. Clark Creative. Thanks for being here. Today I've got some masculine cards and they're featuring products from the stamp market. We're starting off with some cardstock here in cactus green, navy, rusty, and sea glass. And I'm going to be creating sentiments using the Alpha Cuts stamp and the coordinating grid die. And then also using the patterned polka dots stamp, which you'll see in just a minute. This Alpha Cuts stamp set and die is great to build up some letters that you can use for creating any sentiment. And I really like that there's multiples of common letters just to aid with not having to create the whole alphabet for every single individual letter. I find I'm always out of the vowels, the R's, the S's, things like that. So this is great. Also using inks from Hero Arts today, the Intense Black and the Unicorn Pigment ink. So I'm going to start with the sea glass and I'm going to ink over with black ink for this. So I'm just placing my cardstock and the stamp itself into my Misti, transferring to the lid and going to stamp this. Gonna stamp it a few times just till I make sure I've got all the letters nice and dark, and then I'll set that panel aside while I move on to using the Unicorn Pigment ink on the rust cardstock. Now with the pigment ink, because it does take longer to dry, be careful not to smudge it. I end up using my Ranger heat tool to help set that ink a little bit so I'm not smudging ink throughout the project. So once both inks are dry, I take them to my Platinum 6 from Spellbinders and die cut out the letters. Nice clean cuts, just very rectangular. Each letter itself measures 1/2 inch wide by 3/4 inches tall. So here's that first set of letters, and then I'll die cut the second set of letters here. Now what I do is I like to organize these in plastic sheet protectors. So I have their 20 pocket pages. You can find them on Amazon. Each pocket is 2 inches by 2 inches, and that fits these letters perfectly. This is what I do with my alphabet die cuts. I cut full sets when they're brand new, if they're all stuck together, or just individual letters. And then I've got them ready for random projects. So both my cards are going to use green and blue, the cactus green and the navy. So I'm cutting the base, which is an A2 size, the 5.5 by 4 1/4. And then I'm going to cut a mat for each of these. My go-to mat is 5 1/8 by 3 7/8. Now for one of the two cards, I do end up deciding to trim those card panels down a little bit more, but I'll tell you about that when we get to it. Sometimes I will trim down card panels before I stamp. Sometimes I do it after. Today it was just one of those before days, just kind of how I felt like working on the project today. So the type of stamping I'm doing today is somewhat art journal-esque. I really like these stamp sets. They make me think of art journaling, so that's why I wanted to go this way. So I pull out the acrylic blocks. I'm not worrying about getting really deep colored perfect stamping. I'm just kind of going with the flow, letting the ink and the stamps do their thing. A hint to help make this look a little bit more natural is ink off the page, stamp off the page. As you can see, both these panels, at this point, I think they only have one full image on each of the panels, just kind of right in the middle there. Everything else stamps off the side a little bit. Only inking one time, not worrying if it's a perfect stamp or not. And then just kind of layering up, making sure I'm drying thoroughly when I'm switching in between the colors here. Again, that pigment ink does take longer to dry. It's an ink that sits on top of the page, whereas dye inks soak into the page, so they dry a lot quicker. Pigment does not, because it's floating on top, but that's also how you can use a white, is when it's a pigment ink. So drying between layers, going back and forth between the black and the white, just having fun, Not being terribly prescriptive with where I'm stamping or putting things, just kind of letting everything do its own thing, essentially. So kind of propping up my cards here. I do have an A2 card base behind them. That's that white you can see. And I'm going to do a setup with the letters just to see if I'm liking how it's going. And at this point, this right aside, I do need a mat behind my letters. So you can see here I've created the mats behind my letters. For the left card, my mats end up being 3/4 inches by 1 inch. So I've added a 1/4 inch to the size of the letter. On the happy birthday, those card panels, or the letter mats, sorry, end up being 9/16 by 7/8. So I've gone just a hair bigger, essentially. I didn't really measure it. Essentially, I took the letter and had a strip of cardstock and would just measure, you know, visually, not even using the measurements on the cutting platform, that just to get a little bit larger. So it's just a very slim mat on that card. So on the congrats card, I did decide I wanted to basically have 3 mats. I wanted the white card base to show as a mat, and then the green panel to be a little bit smaller and the blue to be a little bit smaller. So the green ends up being 3 7/8 by 5 1/8, and then that top blue layer ends up being 3 1/2 by 4 3/4. I'm using Gina liquid adhesive to adhere all these panels down, and also to do the letters. So the way I'm going to make sure my alignment is good is, first off, I lay off the card and kind of get a feel for where I want the placement to be, and then I use a centering ruler to help get the first 2 letters aligned, and then I go visually from there. So I'm going to line up the bottom of the blue panel with the blue line across the ruler, and that's where I'm going to place that S. So I know that that's centered, and then I'm going to flip the card around, do the exact same thing with the O at the top. Line the bottom of the blue panel with that top blue line that runs across the ruler and get that O placed. From there, I visual align the R, which is that 3rd middle letter, in between the O and the S, and then there I've got my spacing between the 2, and I can just match that spacing between all the rest of the letters. So again, the liquid glue is great to use for this because you do have a couple seconds to move the letter around, get it in its perfect place before that glue sets. For the happy birthday card, I basically do the same thing. I do kind of an arch on those letters, so I get the first couple letters aligned, and then I use foam adhesive to pop up every other letter, just to add a little bit of interest to that. So we've got the first card complete. Here's the pop-up letters on the second. So thank you for joining me today. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and hope to see you again soon.